it time for announcements already? Hi, good morning. My name's Amanda, and welcome to One Church. I'm the One Kids Director, and I'm so excited to be bringing you the announcements. Don't mind me just doing a little bit of dancing this morning. It's one of the ways that I've been keeping myself busy during quarantine. Along with that, I've been staying busy with knitting and sewing masks and hanging out with my new dogs. Luckily, I got them just before quarantine happened, so I'm very excited to be getting to know them. Been staying very busy, just hanging out with friends and probably watching way too much Netflix. But that's okay. These are strange times. I hope that you're all staying busy. But if you're looking for ways to connect in One Church, we have tons of groups going on right now. Just a reminder of some that are going on. We have Immerse, a new men's Bible study, a Bible study with Pastor Alex, and Tea with Friends. If any of those interest you, some emails have come out about those. In case you haven't received the emails, that's totally okay. If you have any questions, haven't received the email, if you need the Zoom link again or any of that, please go ahead and reach out to admin@onechurchcliftonpark.org, and Michelle would be happy to help you with that information. Also, just a reminder, we are still collecting food for Shen backpacks. An email went out about that on Friday about what they're requesting. Again, if you have any questions about that, please reach out to Michelle at onechurchcliftonpark.org. I'm so glad to be bringing you this. I am so looking forward to when we can gather again and get together and hang out. I'm just trying to get better at dancing. And hope to beat all of you at Just Dance when we're done with this. I hope that you have a great week. And if you have any dance challenges, just let me know. I'll be looking for them.
Hey everybody, welcome to One Church Digital. Hope you enjoy worshiping with us. Let's do it. We stand and lift up our hands, for the joy of the Lord is our strength. We bow down and worship Him now. How great, how awesome is He. And together we sing, holy is the Lord God Almighty. The earth is filled with His glory, and holy is the Lord God Almighty. The earth is filled with His glory. The earth is filled with His glory. We stand and lift up our hands, for the joy of the Lord is our strength. We bow down and worship Him now. How great, how awesome is He. And together we sing, and everyone sing, holy is the Lord God Almighty. The earth is filled with His glory. Holy is the Lord God Almighty. The earth
Psalm 126. When the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, we were like those who dreamed. Our mouths were filled with laughter, our tongues with songs of joy. Then it was said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. The Lord has done great things for us, and we are filled with joy. Restore our fortress, Lord, like streams in the Negev. Those who sow with tears will reap with songs of joy. Those who go out weeping, carrying seed to sow, will return with songs of joy, carrying sheaves with them. While we may be social distancing right now, God is not. He is not isolated. He is not in quarantine. He is here working and moving among us. He can be found in the doctors, nurses, and support staff in the hospitals and the nursing homes. He is in those who work in the home healthcare industry, the EMTs, the firefighters, the police officers, in people who work in the homeless shelters and food banks. He is in the kindness, compassion, and selfless acts of strangers. He is found in our continued blessings and in the wonderful world of technology, which keeps us connected and informed. He is found every morning when the sun rises and every evening when we lay our heads on our pillows. He is in every laugh, in every breath, in every smile, every touch of a loved one, and every grateful heart. He is still moving mountains, still bringing us joy, hope, peace, love, strength, and comfort. He is in every home, in every town and city, in every state and province, in every nation, on every continent. And when we are able to move about freely again, I believe we will see even greater things from our God. You're the God of this city. You're the King of these people. You're the Lord of this nation. You are. You're the light in this darkness. You're the hope to the hopeless. You're the peace in the restless. You are. There is no one like our God. There is no one like you, God. Greater things have yet to come. Greater things are still to be done in this city. Greater things have yet to come, and greater things are still to be done in this city. You're the Lord of creation, the creator of all things. You're the King above all kings. You are. You're the strength in the weakness. You're the love to the broken. You're the joy in the sadness. You are. There is no one like our God. There is no one like you, God. Greater things have yet to come. Greater things are still to be done in this city. Greater things have yet to come. Greater things are still to be done in this city. When glory shines from hearts alive, we praise for you, love for you in this city. Greater things have yet to come, and greater things are still to be done here. Lord, come and fill fill our hearts and homes with your presence. The earth is filled with your glory. We believe you will do even greater things. There is no one like you, Lord. No one. There is no one like our God. There is no one like you, God. Greater things have yet to come, and greater things are still to be done in this city. Greater things have yet to come, and greater things are still to be done in this city. Greater things have yet to come, and greater things are still to be done in this city. Greater things have yet to come, and greater things are still to be done here. Lord, we believe in greater things from you.
Good morning, friends. Welcome to our fireside sermon, getting us through the pandemic 1 week at a time. I hope you're doing well. My name's Alex. If you're visiting, I'm the lead pastor here at One Church. We're really glad you chose to spend your Sunday morning with us. Man, what a beautiful day yesterday. We got out and went down with our kids down to the Mohawk River, and they ran into the river because it was warm. They rode bikes. They said hi to people that were driving past. And we came away with that sense of, it felt normal for a little while. The kids started asking questions like, when are the pools opening again and stuff? And Memorial Day, just a few weeks down the road, and suddenly it feels like spring is here, and the flowers outside the church have just all started to just bloom. The blossom on the trees all just came out. And it's just got the element of, oh, it's normal. And then I came to film. And if I'm honest, I'm a little sick of filming in a room by myself. It doesn't, like I said to someone the other day, I spent ages trying to figure out what was missing from a sermon a couple of weeks ago. And my revelation was, it was you guys. It misses sermons of community. They're these ancient art forms of storytelling and working through problems together. And it's just so much harder to do that through a screen. I miss coming in and having John welcome me on the door, and I miss Sandy and Shelley and the team and the coffee they make. I miss seeing the worship team here at unearthly hours because they've decided to get up super early to lead us in worship. I miss church breakfasts cooked by Charlie and Lonnie. I miss so many of you guys. It would just, to go on forever would be ridiculous. But it's made me realize more than ever, I could never do internet church. To me, it's just a thing that I do because I have to right now. But I just look forward to the day of seeing your faces. And if you're someone who jumped into this with us during this time, that's okay that you don't know any of those people. When we meet in person, come and join us, and then you can get to know them, and you'll know how wonderful they are. We're in this series, third week. We call it Hope in the Dark. And it's this time called Eastertide where Jesus, after his resurrection, what he doesn't do is he doesn't come back to his disciples and then just stick with them. He dots in and out. And it's really this quite incredible process. They learn more, in some ways, in this 40 days with him, dotting in and out, than it seems like they learned in the 3 years that they were with him before. Because if we're honest, these group of guys don't seem like they learned very much during that time with Jesus, that 3 years. Even on the week he dies, when he sits down with him, he starts to pour out his heart and starts to say, look, I'm going to die. They get into arguments about who will be the greatest. Like, how obtuse do you have to be? Jesus is pouring his heart out, and I have a question. Do I get the best seat? That's the level that they're at. And so this period, after all they've been through, is really quite amazing to watch. And today we're going to walk through the journey of one guy called Thomas, who's really well known because of an epithet. He's known by the epithet Doubting Thomas. Now, it's a little bit harsh, to be honest. Now, when we read the story, you'll see it's not entirely fair, but this is the guy, if you grew up in Sunday school like I did, you were told, don't be like this guy. He's not a guy to copy. And yet his story's got all these nuances to it. And I think, like, as we read this, Jesus brings hope to him in the dark places in this really wonderful way. It's a story and a thing that speaks to me very deeply in the journey that I've been on. My hope is that for some of you, it will do the same thing as we unpack it, because it's quite complex. So let's read it together. We're going to read the first part, talk about that for a little bit, then go back a little bit into Thomas's story, figure out some stuff there and ask some questions about what happened to him. And then we're going to go through the rest of the story that Jesus takes him on. So if you're joining us in church as a new thing to you, John is one of the biographers of Jesus' life. And Thomas's story, at least this part of it, only appears in his biography, not in any of the others. So here we go. On the evening of that first day of the week, when the disciples were together, the doors locked for fear of the Jewish leaders, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." After he said this, he showed them his hands and side. The disciples were overjoyed when they saw the Lord. Again, Jesus said, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, I am sending you." And with that, he breathed on them and said, "Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive anyone's sins, their sins are forgiven. If you do not forgive them, they are not forgiven." And that part, man, we can't get into that whole sins are forgiven thing today. Now, Thomas, also known as Didymus, which means twin, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them and stood among them. And then Jesus came and stood among them. And we'll pause there because we'll get back to the whole, the Thomas story coming back full circle. But right now, Thomas is in this place where he isn't sure he can ever believe again. What he's been through has pulled his life apart. And he's at that place where he's like, I don't know if I can say yes to this again. Now, as I say, it's a little unfair because what we see is this story where Jesus comes and appears to all of the other disciples. So we've lost Judas at this point. Judas was the one that betrayed Jesus. He's gone. And so there's the 10 of them. And Jesus comes and stands there. And it says on the first day of the week, the evening of the first day of the week. So this is Resurrection Sunday, where we were a couple of weeks ago. This is them. So think about what's happened during that day. All day long, there's been rumors of resurrection. Mary, the person we looked at last week, Mary Magdalene, she's seen Jesus, but nobody else has yet seen him. And then that evening, they gather together behind a locked door, scared stiff, and then Jesus walks through the door and into the room. And the 10 see him, and they believe. And Thomas isn't there, and he doesn't believe. So we, for 2,000 years now as a church, like worldwide, have called this guy Doubting Thomas. It's fair to assume that had any of the others not been there, they would have found it just as hard to believe as Thomas did. They're all doubting. They're all struggling with this whole resurrection thing. Thomas has gotten labeled because he didn't happen to be there. So the question I have is, why wasn't he there? This is like the first ever Sunday night church. I grew up not going to Sunday night church as a kid, but as I got older and faith became my own, I went through a phase once where I would go to church 7 times a week. Now, that's not a good or a bad thing. It just is where I was. And some of it was guilt, and that was my own baggage to deal with. It wasn't the church's fault, but I just felt like I had to. And there was almost this like feeling of, well, everyone went on Sunday morning, and they're like the backbone of the church. We went on Sunday night, and then the heartbeat of the church went to the prayer meeting on Tuesday night. And some of it was, I went because I was trying to prove something, and that's a whole other story that maybe we'll get into when we talk about Peter next week. But Sunday night church was a big deal. That was like where the real people went. This is the first ever Sunday night church, and Thomas is nowhere to be found. Like, there could be, I guess, reasons that he wouldn't be there. Maybe someone had to go buy food. Maybe that's why he got sent out. Someone has to do that kind of stuff. I used to be in a small group in England where they used to make me make the tea. Every week I was the tea boy, which in an English small group is a very big role. That could be the reason he's gone. Maybe he's gone exploring what's next. Like, he's got to go back to a career maybe that he had before. The Jesus dream, whatever it looked like, he's done with. But I actually think a more logical answer would be this. If Thomas is at a point where faith seems like he can't do it again, he can't ante up again in the Pope expression, he can't bring himself to bet again on anything being real. Maybe he just doesn't want to be around anyone who believes anything. Maybe the idea of being around a person that has faith is just too much. As I said before, there's been this rumor of resurrection all day long. We've based this whole series on this idea that the resurrection is true, but it's not yet true for them. And so all day long, there's been this chatter amongst them. Mary's seen him. Oh, he appeared to two disciples walking on this road to a different town. There's these rumors, these stories. And for some of them, that's exciting. And some of them, they're waiting, and there's all these possibilities. But maybe for Thomas, it's just all too much. And he says, I've got to get away from this. Maybe he just shuts himself off. Thomas's story is fascinating because, as I say, that doubting Thomas label, not only is it not fair based on what the other disciples have been through, they got to see Jesus and that's the only reason they believed. It's not fair because actually when we look back at Thomas' story early on in this book, John, Thomas is the one that seems like he believes in Jesus more than anybody else. Thomas is the one that's willing to stick by Jesus all the way to the end. We're going to jump in just briefly to this story in John chapter 11, verse 16. So let's take a look at this. Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. When he heard this, Jesus said, this sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and his sister Lazarus. So when he heard Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days, and then he said to his disciples, let's go back to Judea. But Rabbi, they said, a short while ago the Jews there tried to stone you, and yet you are going back. Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by this world's light. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light. After he had said this, he went on to tell them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to wake him up. His disciples said, Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better. Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So when he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. And for your sake, I'm glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. Then Thomas said to the rest of the disciples, let us also go, that we may die with him. So a little background here. Jesus all the action for Easter, the time we've just walked through, it takes place in this big city, Jerusalem. But most of Jesus' life was spent in this sort of backwater town, a ton of miles away. I've tried to think of a local town that I could give you to just explain just how sort of backwater this town was. And I just can't think of an example. When I lived in Michigan, we would have said the same way that the Jerusalem people feel about Nazareth and the towns that Jesus lived in was the same way that we would feel about Ohio. So at one point someone says to Jesus, someone says about Jesus, he's from Nazareth. And the response is, Nazareth, does anything good come from there? And in Michigan, we would say, Ohio? Does anything good come from Ohio? So remember that, Joel Butler, our other students, Renee, nothing good comes in Ohio. Nothing good happens in Ohio. But there's this backwaterness to where he is, that he spent most of his time in. And Jesus says, I'm going back to Judea, back to this general area of Jerusalem. And the response is, don't you remember what life was like there? They tried to kill us there. They tried to kill you there. Don't go back. And all the disciples sort of have this sense of fear. And Thomas is the one that makes this response at the end. Let us go with him. We'll die with him. Thomas believes in Jesus very deeply. He believes in Jesus so deeply that he'll walk with him all that long distance back to Jerusalem and lay down his life. We talked last week about how all of the disciples have this sense of they have a dream for Jesus story. Most of them haven't caught onto the idea it might involve death and then resurrection. They have a hope that Jesus will do one of a few different things. He'll lead a revolution and overthrow the government, or he'll start a prayer revolution and take them into the desert, or he'll get people to obey the law in a better way than they have before, and that the land will become a land that God blesses. That all these different dreams that were around at the time. Resurrection wasn't really on the cards for them. Maybe Thomas's dream is that first one. Maybe Thomas's dream is that with Jesus they will go and they'll fight. And they may die, but it will be worth it. Think about that William Wallace scene back in that movie Braveheart. Mel Gibson with his wonderful Scottish accent. They may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom. That's as much as a Scottish accent. I have too many Scottish friends to insult it further. But what he does when he unpacks that in the scene is he says, don't you think dying many years from now, you'd love to come back to this moment? You'd live imprisoned all the rest of your life. If you've said no to this moment, wouldn't you come back and say, I'd just love one more chance for real freedom? And maybe that's where Thomas is. Thomas the revolutionary is willing to go with Jesus and lay down his life. That's an impressive statement, right, for a guy that we've come to know as Doubting Thomas. But then the question that comes to my mind is this: what happens in this next week or 10 days that takes Thomas from Thomas the revolutionary through the day before Jesus' crucifixion, where they're in a garden and he runs away, to the day of the resurrection where he says, I just can't do it. I just can't believe again. I think Thomas saw something in this period of time that took him beyond just Jesus is worth dying for. I think what he's about to see happen takes him from there to the more sense of maybe Jesus is actually worth living for. And maybe he's actually bigger than the story of death as I know it and life as I know it. He's going to walk with Jesus as they go back. It's that passage we just talked about, just outlines what's about to happen. We don't need to read the next passage. We've already had it set up for us. Lazarus is dead, and Jesus will go back, and Jesus will bring him back to life. It's like the resurrection precursor to the big resurrection story that Jesus will walk through. But at this time, imagine what that's like to be Thomas. They go back after this amazing statement of faith. Let's go and die with him. And they walk back into a scene of death and misery. By the time they get there, Lazarus, we're told, has been dead for 4 days, and Jesus will stand outside the tomb and in this confident voice say, Lazarus, come out. And then Lazarus does. Imagine what it's like to be Thomas. Suddenly you're not presented with a master that you'll follow to death. Suddenly you're presented with a master our Lord, who is also the master over death and life and everything in it, that can stand in front of a tomb and say to a man who has already started to smell, get up and live again. And then the whole story sort of catches this sort of wave of like it just builds and builds and builds. They go from there into the center of Jerusalem, from this town Bethany on the outskirts into Jerusalem, and crowds gather. The streets are lined. People start singing and celebrating. The Roman soldiers, with all their power, back off and leave it all to take place. The Jewish leaders cry out with this almost like heartbrokenness of, the whole world has gone after Jesus. We've lost. This is a disaster. And Thomas is right in the middle of that. Thomas is in the middle of this life-changing series of events. He's right there. He's seeing Jesus do things he never imagined he could do. It's almost too good to be true. It reminds me of a feeling I have back some years ago. I grew up surfing a little bit. We didn't live super close to the ocean, but every time we went, I would rent or borrow a surfboard, and so I learned to surf a little bit. I was never very good. And then I went on this surfing trip with a group of guys to the south of France. And some of them were awesome surfers. My best friend Jim that I went with, he's a terrible surfer. But it was a couple of guys that were really good. And I'd just fallen in love with Laura. So I was emailing all the time. I don't think I gave myself a very good impression, them a very good impression of me on this trip. They thought I just wanted to sit writing emails all the time, which I did because I was in love. And it was worth it. Every email sent, even though it cost me a couple of $100, it was well worth the price. And so surfing on this trip, we had these moments, or I had these moments where I would catch this wave. And if you've never surfed before, I think when you're surfing fairly big waves, it would be fair to say it's a balance between you catching the wave and the wave catching you. It's this hugely powerful thing. It's the ocean. It's way stronger, way bigger than you. And so you kind of catch it, but it catches you. And it's this moment where you get up on the board, however long that lasts for, however long your balance will hold. And it's just as great as you can imagine. There's this sense of, oh, this is incredible. I'm doing the thing. I'm on a surfboard and it's flying along on this wave, and it's just wonderful. And I guess any adrenaline sport has probably a similar sort of feeling, whether it's, big man in skiing or something like that, or skydiving. There's just this feeling of, oh, I'm flying. I'm actually in the air. Okay, I'm falling more than flying, but I'm actually, it's going well, and this feels incredible. And that wave of emotion that we get caught up in those moments, it's somewhat similar to what I think Thomas must be going through in this moment. Thomas is seeing Jesus do things he couldn't imagine could take place. It's changing everything. Suddenly there's more than just a revolution on the cards. Suddenly the whole worldview that he's lived with is being pulled apart. And it's better. The new story is better. The new story involves death is not the end. There's a story after that. Just imagine what that means. And then think about Thomas' journey through the Easter weekend. This Jesus has unpacked God for him in a way that he couldn't have imagined. And then on the Thursday, seems like he gets sad, panicked even. They dash off to a garden and they spend some time in prayer. And it seems like Jesus has lost all of his confidence. He's suddenly praying prayers like, God, if it's possible, take this away from me, but not my will, but your will be done. He's starting to talk more openly about death. It's like the moment where you've been able to believe that the business will survive, and then you see the CEO with his head in his hands, like his head's on the desk, and he's got tears pouring down his face, and you're like, oh, we're really in trouble now. That's what Thomas has walked through. And then there's death, and then the other end, there's this rumor of resurrection. There's this story of Jesus might be alive again. But how hard is that to believe? It was incredible enough to see resurrection once, but to believe it a second time. And it worked the first time because Jesus was there and Jesus did it. And to Thomas, Jesus could do anything. But there's no Jesus there to bring Jesus back. How could a dead man bring himself back to life? All these questions for Thomas. It feels like that moment where, to picture it as a tower, everything comes crumbling down. In actual fact, this image of a tower is actually a really helpful way for us to understand some of what Thomas is going through and a little bit of what you and I will go through at different times. So let's play with these a little bit. I grew up playing with blocks. My mum and dad sent me to this preschool, and I can still remember just building blocks hour after hour. And this one just wonderful preschool teacher that would just sit with me, and she'd always knock it down at the end, and I'd always pretend that I didn't know she was going to knock it down, but I would always build the tower the same way, and it always looked something like this. It had just the main basic thing. And I could just do this for actually hours, and just you guys could just sit there and watch me over and over again. But the tower would always look something like this. This is like the tower of my childhood. It had the same sort of aspects to it. What happens to us is that we're brought up in a particular way. This is especially true, especially true if you were brought up in a household that had a faith. So whether it was evangelical or Catholic or from a different faith tradition altogether, you're told certain things about the way that the world works. Now, that's not misleading. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing bad about sharing your faith with your kids. It's actually the most important thing you can do. But there's a sense that until the kids get older, it's not their faith, it's your faith. And this is true of loads of things about the way that you bring them up. You look after cars a particular way, you make food a particular way, you go on certain types of vacation. And we all could look at our family and say, that's how we do things in our family. Again, all good. Eventually, what happens about 11 or 12, 13, 14 is, as a child, hopefully begins to start to question certain things and starts to ask this really important question. Is this my faith or is it my parents' faith? Now, maybe you've never done that. Maybe if you look back at your life, you've always just accepted it. Again, I'm not telling you right or wrong. What I'm saying is a really healthy thing is to start to examine it for yourself and start to ask these questions. Maybe you say, I'm not sure it's quite like that. I'm not sure I believe it in that way. I'm not saying there's not an objective truth here or anything. I'm just saying that there's so much about faith that is a little subjective, at least. And so maybe as the child examines it, and hopefully they do this with someone that loves them and cares about them, they ask new questions and they start to unpack it and they start to build the tower in a slightly different way. And actually in this process, it's getting stronger. It's like this picture of Big Ben in England. This is the Elizabeth Tower. It's very sentimental to me, always makes me think of the homeland. They're rebuilding it right now and they're making it stronger. The process that it's going through is important, and we could find loads of other parallels to that. The experience that putting something through fire, if you make a clay pot, you put it through fire to strengthen it. Otherwise, it can't stand the pressure that it will have put on it. This is the same process. You and I hopefully went through something where we started to say, what do I believe about God? And we hopefully, God was involved in that process for us. It's a conversation and God speaks to us. But again, our faith doesn't always have to look exactly like our parents. If we don't do that, then what happens is at some point, when something bad happens, when there's some kind of trial, all the things we looked at last week, those ideas of grief and stuff, something will happen where the foundation starts to get poked a little bit. Something can happen that can bring the whole thing down. And it just finally gets to a point where you lose the main support structure. And you're left with this tower that's really just collapsed around you. I've been there where Thomas is. Maybe you have as well. For me, it was the second year of seminary. They always say don't hire a first-year seminary student to do any pastoral job because they think they know everything. Don't hire a second-year seminary student to a pastoral job because they just don't know what they believe right now. It's an intentional process where they pull some stuff apart. And I remember sitting in these classes and one class just walking out in tears because my question was, I'm not sure I believe right now. That was hard to go through. Now I was able to come through the other side, and for me it was a really good process of coming through the other side saying, I'm actually better off now than I was. My faith feels strong. But that process can take a long time. That process can be so difficult. Maybe you're in a place like Thomas was. You're like, I'm not sure where I am. And being around people of faith can be really difficult in those times. Maybe that's why Thomas doesn't want to be there. There's all these questions. And the idea of rebuilding a tower, it just seems too much. Maybe Thomas feels like God has let him down. Maybe he feels like Jesus failed him. Jesus promised all this stuff. And then he died. And Thomas can just about handle the loss of that dream, but he can't handle dreaming again right now. He can't handle believing something again right now. And so he's not there when Jesus turns up. I think you can actually go through that process and come out the other side better off. And I would suggest that's exactly what happens to Thomas. Thomas will go through this process, and he'll come through there making this faith statement that blows the faith statement he made earlier apart. The faith statement about let us go and die with him. Thomas is about to say something that is possibly the greatest statement of faith about who Jesus is and what he has done that anybody will make at any point in the New Testament, maybe at any point in history, and Thomas will make it, and it's building up to that. Jesus is leading him through this process. I would expect Jesus to come in and fix the problem straight away. And part of that is because, if I'm honest, when I think about me, when I experience doubt, there's a part of me that when I doubt, I feel like I'm doing something wrong. I feel like something's gone wrong with the system. I feel like I'm maybe letting God down a little bit. Maybe I feel like I need to fix this as soon as I can. I need to get the problem sorted. I need to get back to certainty. And yet Jesus walking through this with Thomas, watch what he does. It's fascinating. Now, Thomas, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here, see my hands, reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." Thomas said to him, "My Lord and my God." Then Jesus told him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." So think back to the first part of the story that we read earlier. Jesus comes and he visits the 10 disciples, not Thomas. And you'd think of that as though, if I were in Jesus' shoes, I kind of think about it like a big family leaving a kid behind. You hear all these stories about big families that will go somewhere and then they'll be on the way back and be like, "We missed the 5th out of 7 children." I've done that, not with my own kids, but I did take a group of about 60 students to a questionable area in Detroit, a rundown sort of area that had high crime and all those places that parents from the area I worked in would not want their kids to be stuck in. And one of the drivers left a couple of kids there. And so they came up to me afterwards with that heartbroken look of, "You left us behind." And I tried to explain it wasn't me, but I guess by nature of being in charge, there was some responsibility on me. But I would want to fix that as quickly as possible. Jesus comes and appears to these 10, and then he leaves it a week before he comes back and gets back to Thomas. The next week, a week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. There's no rush on Jesus' part. I want to process all of that tower stuff, all of that rebuilding, that deconstruction, that doubt. I want to get through it as quickly as possible, and I want to get back to certainty. I want to move through it and be done. And Jesus, it seems, is in no rush whatsoever. Does he want us to move towards faith? Yes. Does he want us to experience him in new ways? Yes, but there is not a rush in him that there is in us. It tells me this: he's far more comfortable with our times of doubt and our times of figuring stuff out than we are. It doesn't seem like he sees it as a journey of getting from one end to another, but as a process that's really important to him and really important for us. He allows Thomas this incredible space to experience doubt. A few years ago, we left the kids with some friends. We were going to California, and Laura's parents were going to watch the kids. Then we found out they had a trip the same week. And so we managed to piece together a few people that would look after our kids, some really wonderful friends, took them some for 3 days, some for 1 day. And one of the ladies that had the kids for a couple of nights was our friend Denise. Denise had a couple of dogs, and Gigi was about 2 at the time, and she would freak out every time the big dog came near her. And when we got back, Denise had taught them both a couple of phrases to help them get through whatever they were going through. It was really wonderful, care that she gave to them. What she would teach Gigi to say is, "When in doubt, don't freak out. When in doubt, don't freak out." That, I think, is our mantra We have a tendency when we hit those moments of doubt to freak out. What do I do? The world doesn't make sense right now. The tower feels like it's in pieces. And we freak out just like Thomas. We don't know how to respond to that moment. And yet what God does for us is he walks us through this process and says it's okay. The tower is being rebuilt. This is a good thing in the long run. Stay with me. Don't give up. Don't freak out. Thomas goes from doubting Thomas to a Thomas with this new faith where he cries out in the end, my Lord and my God. This is the first time in the whole of the gospel stories that someone will point to Jesus and say, this is God walking amongst us in this flat, blank, sort of like flat out, definite sense. And in doing it, Thomas is going to mirror something that it says right at the start. No one has ever seen God, but the one and only Son, who is himself God, is in closest relationship with the Father. He has made him known. John says that right at the beginning, back in John chapter 1, and we've been waiting all the time, waiting, till we get to the point where somebody will say it that clearly, that openly. And finally we get there, with this doubting figure Thomas, who's been back and forth with, what do I even believe? Can I even get the courage up to believe something again? Am I just done for good? Am I out? Do I want to be with these people? He's going through all of those struggles that you and I have maybe gone through in the past, and maybe we're working through right now. And Jesus walks him through to the point where he can look at him and say, my Lord and my God. And what amazes me is this: Jesus doesn't walk him back to certainty. I love this little nuance to the end of the story. Thomas says, Jesus offers Thomas this chance to do what Thomas said he needed to have happen. He says, I need to put my finger in his holes in his hand, and I need to put my hand in his side where the spear went in. And Jesus offers him that chance. What Jesus offers him is certainty. He offers him certainty. And Thomas chooses to stop at faith, not at certainty. Never touches. Seeing is enough for him. Maybe he secretly knows that he won't have certainty, that we don't have certainty in anything. You might believe that God has led you into a certain job, into a certain career track, into a certain relationship, a marriage. He's led you to buy the right house. He's led you to the right area or state or country to live in. He's led you in some process. Maybe it's something as crazy as he's led you to wear the right pair of clothes on a certain day or anything like that. But we're never given certainty. We're given a chance to walk in faith, to trust that the God who made the universe is caring for us. Things won't always look how we want them to look like, how we want them to look. We'll have chances to freak out. We'll have times where we're in doubt. And ultimately, we'll walk that last journey, we'll walk through that death thing that we talked a little bit about last week. And Thomas has just watched Jesus walk through. And in that moment, Psalm 23 that we talked about on Easter says that it's like a valley of the shadow of death. It can't hurt us. Jesus has defeated death. But still in that moment that we walk through it, it's intimidating and a little scary. In that moment that doesn't feel like certainty. And yet Jesus says to us, no, I'm with you. You might not be able to see me, but I've been this way before. It's going to be okay. I'm walking with you right now. We're never given certainties, but we are given a chance to walk in faith. We get to do something that Jesus said would make us incredibly blessed. The last thing he says is, because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. One of the last things Jesus will say to his disciples is he'll leave this little promise for all these people that will come after them, that don't get to see him. And he'll say, you are very blessed. If you can hear stories about me, hear rumors of me, if you can connect with me for yourself, even when you can't see me, there's so much blessing in that. We're given a chance to walk by faith. Let's close in prayer. Jesus, thank you that you've been present with us as we've studied together, as we've looked at Thomas, who's walked a journey many of us have walked, a journey of doubt. My tendency, God, is when I doubt, I freak out. And I think a message we can take about that from this is that when in doubt, don't freak out. You can use the process for incredible good. Thank you, our Lord and our God, for the journey you've led us on today and lead us on in the future. Amen. Thank you for joining us today, friends. We're going to have an announcement loop that played at the start. It's going to play at the end as well. But we're jumping onto some Zoom rooms to do communion together. If you've never done that before, maybe you've never accepted Jesus as your Savior, you can do that for yourself right now. It is just a prayer away. It's that prayer that Thomas prayed, that my Lord and my God. Maybe it's a prayer of asking God to let you see him. Maybe not with your physical eyes, but let you see him in the world around you. Wherever you are, we believe as a church that this God loves you. He's passionate about you. May you experience him this week. If you've never taken communion before, come join us on Zoom. It's slightly awkward because we're looking at each other through screens and it's hard for everyone to talk at the same time, yet it's been a profound experience for me. So we'd love you to jump in and join us. You can check out the chat to the right of the screen and it will give you the link to the Zoom room. It's also on Facebook. And we'll see you in there. Have a great week. Bye-bye.